What's up, guys? This is Adam from Properly Wound, and as promised, I have a very special review for you guys today. Before we get started, quick shout out to Alan from the Properly Wound Facebook group. He lent this in to me to review. Pretty cool. I don't think there are very many reviews or up close and personals with this watch on YouTube right now, so pretty excited to be one of the first people that actually get to handle these and review it. You guys can follow him at Chrono Quest. He's got some really cool pieces. Pretty nice rotation. I think he usually sells some watches and has a really great Instagram and has some great photographs of his pieces as well and pieces that he's borrowed. So head over to at Chrono Quest. Anyway, guys, so we're going to dive into a kind of a short and sweet review of this watch. We're going to quickly talk about brief history of the 62 Moss, and then as well talk about the specifications of this watch and sort of how it wears on the wrist and sort of my thoughts a day in the life. And then we're going to quickly talk about some of the watches that it competes against and other watches in its price point, and what kind of competition it faces at that price point, because it is a pretty expensive watch. So first off, this is a recreation of the 6217, the first official dive watch from Seiko back in 1965, which came to be known as the 62 MAS or the 62 Moss. So this version is actually slightly bigger than that watch. This one's 39.9 millimeters, so pretty much 40 millimeters. I have a Submariner, a pre-ceramic Submariner right here, so you guys can see the size difference, and you can see that the Submariner actually looks like it wears a little bit larger. I think that's due to the fatter bezel, but we'll get into the specs of the sizing and everything later. So the original 62 Moss was 37 millimeters and had a water resistance of 200 meters, whereas this one, or 150 meters, whereas this one has a water resistance of 200 meters. So other than the size and obviously the movement, Seiko did a pretty great job with making everything pretty much faithful to the original in terms of case design. You have the lug holes, the big crown. Now the 62 Moss came in two different iterations. It had the big crown and the small crown. So this would be closer to what you would find on the 62 Moss big crown model. So like I said, 62 Moss, first professional diver, which was closely followed by the Willard and then the 6309 Turtle, and then plenty of other iterations. Also the original Marine Master, that was a high beat, 36,000 beats per minute. So the original 62 Moss, 150 meter water resistant, and had a slow beat rate of 18,800, which was pretty standard for the time then. So I'm gonna get into some specifications on this watch. So I think one of the biggest things that pop out at you with this thing is that beautiful gray sunburst anthracite looking dial. So I think the light is probably doing it justice here. You guys can see how radiant that dial is and how well it contrasts with the light, with the dark and the light gray. So I think that's probably one of my favorite parts of the watch. Dial is pretty simple. You have the Seiko automatic, Divers 200, Dia-Shock 26 joules. This does have the 8L35 movement in it, which we'll get to in a minute. So just like the original 62 Moss, it has the square rectangular seconds hand, hour and minute tracks, and then as well as the hour hands as well. You can see the fatter blocks at 12, 6, and 9. And then there's also a date window here at 3 o'clock, typical of an 8L35 movement. So the bezel itself, the bezel's pretty thin, but I think it's painted aluminum just like the MM300. And the actual action of this thing is buttery smooth. It feels really similar to the MM300. The MM300's the actual bezel's much thicker. So this one feels a little less substantial, but nonetheless, the actual glide and the clicks, 120 click bezel of this watch is absolutely buttery smooth. So when it comes to the case, there is a nice little contrast of polished sides. You guys can sort of see all the marks on there. all the smudge marks, the polished sides with the brush tops. And what's interesting about these brush tops is they're not overly brushed. They're actually kind of almost like a polished brush. They're not as matte as some of the other watches you might see that have very brushed surfaces. So overall, nice contrast there. I don't know the lug to lug on this, but I do know that the strap is 20 millimeters. Getting to the strap, so this comes on a bracelet, but it also comes on this silicone strap. So this isn't like the typical cheap plastic Seiko strap that you usually find. It's much more similar to the turtle straps that are buttery smooth. And this has, it feels pretty nice. I don't know how else I would describe it, except it's not overly smooth, but it's a pretty nice strap. The only complaint that I have, I'll give you guys a wrist shot really quickly here, is that, let me get this on, when it's actually on the wrist, so this is my 7¼ inch wrist. Keep in mind, guys, that the watch does appear slightly larger because it's closer to the camera. The only complaint that I have really is this whale tail end. So I by no means have a very small wrist. It's probably closer to medium / above average, and you really have to kick that keeper back to the end, and you can still see that it's still coming back on the end there. So if they shortened the strap a little bit, I think that would have been a little bit better. In terms of the keeper, it's just it's a black stainless steel keeper with a Seiko sign on it, and then a typical buckle. Nothing special here, just stainless steel. And it is pretty breathable. You guys can see here the indents and sort of the breathability of the strap here for those hot summer days. So overall, the actual lugs themselves, they taper down pretty well on the wrist, as you can see here. Plus, the watch isn't very large to begin with, so it's going to fit a wide variety of wrists. I can see this fitting a very small wrist just fine. So case spec is pretty simple. You have the whale on there, and you have Seiko Air Divers 200 meters. Now, this is a limited edition of 2000, so you can actually see the number right there. This one's number 1867 out of 2000. And nothing too crazy about the case back, pretty true to the original 62 Mas as well. Yeah, guys, so the 8L35 movement as well is in here. Probably my only complaint about this watch, this price point is at 3,800 euros, which is brand new, which is just over $4,000 at this time in 2017, I believe. So it is really expensive. And to be honest, that 8L35 movement, as robust as it is, it's an undecorated Grand Seiko movement. I would say, based on my experience, my personal experience, and experiences I've seen from others on the forums and whatnot, the 8L35 is not very accurate. I personally had an 8L35 in my MM300 that was, I think, plus 25 seconds or plus 30 seconds a day, and I had to get it regulated. So I'd probably like to see something a little extra special in this watch, maybe an upgraded or like a fine-tuned 8L35. For that $3,800 price point, I expect to see something a little bit, just something a little extra, you know? So overall, though, the watch, can't complain. It's actually absolutely beautiful. Like I said, the biggest thing is that dial. This is definitely for the diehard Seiko fans that need a 62 Mas reissue. So, all right, Jared, break. So I'm going to do a quick comparison again so you guys can see. So in my opinion, the pre-ceramic Rolex, or the pre-super cases, this is a 14060 Submariner, are some of the best wearing watches on any type of wrist. And you can see that the 62 Mas is pretty close in size, as I showed in the previous video. Pretty close in size to the Submariner. So in my opinion, this is one of the ideal sizes for a watch, and which means the 62 Moss is, in my opinion, absolutely perfect in terms of sizing. And I think they did a great job with going up in size, bumping it up 2 or 3 millimeters over the original 62 Moss. Because although it's not faithful completely to the original, I think it's a great modern size without being too large and too hefty. I think 37 millimeters might have been slightly underwhelming. And it's also 14 millimeters thick, but to be quite honest, it doesn't really wear like a 14 millimeter thick watch. I'd say it wears more like maybe like a 12 and a half, 13. So super manageable, definitely can wear it under a cuff as well. So the $1 million question, is the 62 Moss reissue worth the right around $4,000 mark? So quick funny little story, guys. Last summer of 2016, I was looking at the original 62 Moss watches, and they were running on the forums anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 depending on condition. And once Seiko decided to release this at Bezel 2017, those prices have absolutely skyrocketed. A really good example will be almost approaching $3,000, definitely over $2,000. So that's all because of this price point here. Even used 62 Mosses at this point, used mint ones, are running about $3,500-ish, I think. That's what I've been seeing on the forums lately. So first question that comes to mind, is this worth two Marine Master 300s or Seiko MM300s? So the MM300 is probably the premier diver that Seiko offers. We're not considering Grand Seiko or anything, but when it comes to Seiko, the Marine Master is sort of the Mac Daddy of all Seiko divers, and that thing has the 8L35, the monocoque case. It's just a badass watch, right? And you can get that brand new for around $2,000, used anywhere from $1,500 to about $1,800. So is this watch worth two MM300s? I mean, to be honest, that's probably a question that you're going to have to answer yourself. Do you want a limited edition reissue out of 2,000? To be honest, I don't really think that's that limited. But in general, I would say no, it's not worth double the price. So don't get me wrong, this reissue is absolutely gorgeous, but seeing an MM300 in person, I think it's every bit as high quality as the 62 Moss reissue, and offers even a couple other cooler features with the monocoque case and the titanium ratcheting clasp and everything. So that's the first big question. Is it worth two MM300? And in my opinion, it is not. Second question, is it worth $3,500–4,000, period? So this is also a really difficult question to answer. If you're a super diehard Seiko enthusiast, honestly, I can see why you would make this purchase. But in the back of my head, when I think $3,500, $4,000, all I can think of is all the other watches that I can get for that money. So we're talking about Rolex watches here already. We're talking about pre-owned Explorer 2s. We're talking about pre-owned Explorer 1s, the 36 millimeter watches, 14-270s, 16-570s. We're talking about base level Mark 18 IWC pilots that run on the gray market even cheaper than this does used for a brand new IWC. We're talking about Omega Moonwatch money. We're talking about Omega Seamasters. I mean, this is well above a used Omega SMP ceramic. So that's the biggest thing here is there are so many watches out there for this price point that you're really going to have to be a diehard Seiko fan or a collector that has everything already in a sense and wants something unique, something that's limited, something that'll look cool at your local Red Bar meet, you know, or on your Instagram pictures. But Overall, absolutely gorgeous watch. Very cool. I'm a huge Seiko fanboy, as you guys know. I've had plenty of Seikos in the past. Would love to own an original 62 Mas one day. Probably would rather actually have the original 62 Mas over this reissue. So absolutely love the watch. But would I buy it? Would I spend my hard-earned dollars, 3,500 of those, on a 62 Mas reissue? Probably not. But like I said, it's going to be probably a future classic. I don't know if you can call it a future classic since it's already sort of a remake of a classic, but I think these values will probably hold pretty steady. Limited Seikos usually tend to rise a little bit, or at least hold a good amount of value. So anyways, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Hopefully I gave you guys some good shots of this. Oh, before we go, let me do a quick little loom shot for you guys. Of course, this has the famous Seiko loom. Hopefully the camera will catch it. So you guys can see how bright that is. To be honest, I think the MM300 actually shines a little bit brighter, but as far as I know, it uses the exact same loom formula. So it might just be the fact that these lights have been shining on here and I haven't put a flashlight on it or anything like that. But hopefully you guys can see that this is super, super bright. So anyways, guys, let me know what you think in the comments. Please follow us on the Properly Wound Facebook page. Subscribe to our channel if you have not already. I'll be doing a lot more reviews coming in the future. So I will see you guys in the next review or live stream or in the Facebook group. See you guys later.